Welcome back, friends. It's another episode of The Mindful CEO. I'm your co-host, Chris Angell, here with our other co-host, handsome as ever, Aaron, with a new mustache. I'm thinking that's a good look for you.
I was thinking I came as you for Halloween, so
Oh, shut up. Your Gomez picture was amazing on Facebook. I love that.
I was like, I'm gonna come as Chris Angell, angry entrepreneur guy. So
Angry entrepreneur guy. I don't think I've never been called the angry entrepreneur guy.
that's our next podcast.
Okay.
That's the Upside Down World podcast
Yeah.
for us, is the angry entrepreneur guy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know how long it's gonna last. We'll see. I think
All
it's
right.
going to grow in, but anyway, yeah, it's a good couple of days. Um, and today, this is a really interesting podcast for me. This is Tom Fox. I'll let him introduce himself, and he is the what do you say, the compliance evangelist? Is that yes? It's one of the names. I just like evangelist. I like adding evangelist to things. I'm a chaos evangelist, and uh, it's such a good topic for us because it's so not up our alley. We've been getting fairly deep into the woo-woo woods with
Uh-huh.
some of the gas, right? I was
Yeah.
re-listening, all the heart space and the sound meditation and all that stuff. And here comes Tom Fox, compliance guy.
Compliance
We're going to
evangelist.
talk about compliance, but that's really our jam here, is to talk about that tension between those two
Right.
worlds. And if you get I know for me, I'm like, I don't want to talk about compliance. I don't talk about regulations and stuff, but that's the CEO part. That's the
Yeah.
hello. If you're not doing that, you wind up, right, Tom, with an orange jumpsuit. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, Tom, and we'll just kick it off from there. But really, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Sure, and thanks. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. My name is Tom Fox. I am the self-styled compliance evangelist. I took that moniker because in ancient Greek, an evangelist was the bringer of the good news. And I firmly believe that compliance is the good news for business. I'm a lawyer by professional background. I did that for about 35 years, 25 years. For the last 15 years, I've been doing compliance work. And for the last 10 years, I've pretty much just been a pontificator. I have the only podcast network in compliance, appropriately called the Compliance Podcast Network. I have
Whoa.
50 podcasts on that network. I blog every day about compliance or compliance related topics. I've written 33 books on compliance, business ethics, and leadership. So this is the world I live in. The good news for me was that I, every day, in every way, in everything I do, fight the international scourge of bribery and corruption.
Mm.
Bribery and corruption cost the world, according to the United Nations, $3 trillion in lost monies. And what I do is a part of that fight within the corporate world. I was a trial lawyer and then a corporate lawyer for those first 25 years. I'm a firm believer in capitalism. I think that capitalism can, in many ways, lead innovation and lead a lot of different things. And so I want to fight corruption within capitalist system and within the US corporate system. The mindfulness part is that compliance is actually a business process. Compliance is not Dr. No from the land of no. It's not the Department of Business Non-Development. Compliance is a process, and it's a process to help you manage your risk. That risk can be a business risk. That risk can be a reputational risk. That risk can be a legal risk. But the process will allow you to do more, make your company more efficient, because effective compliance equates to efficient business operations, and that equates to greater ROI and greater profitability. So I see my role as to bring this message to as many people as I can. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to be able to talk to, as we would say in Texas, use all's audience.
Oh, nice. Bring it in the use
Nice.
all.
Use all. Nice.
Hey, you know, Chris, I'm going to start because Tom, you triggered something for me about this when we were talking pre-show and then again just now. Um, the thought about I was this thought about compliance is, someone outside of me is telling me what to do. They're drawing the lines of what I can do or can't do, and I must comply. And it's a sort of a top down, and I bristle at that. That's the nice way to say what I do
Hmm.
about that. Um, but that's just sort of like a default. construct. That's not true. It's not, when you bring in ethics to it and you bring in workability into it, I'm committed to being in compliance with my calling, for example. And my resistance to compliance, my default resistance to compliance keeps me from having it be a process. Like, keep it from being like I do this every day and I do this every day to keep my calling alive. Like, I would do that. So Tom, I think it's really a great frame for compliance, that it's bigger than just the rules and regulations that are designed from the outside to control us. Is there anything that how do you see that? How does that occur for you?
Aaron, your perception is the perception of 99.9999999% of business people in the United States, corporate executives, CEOs, everyone. And that's because 20 years ago, compliance was lawyer driven. It was written by lawyers for lawyers, and it was designed to allegedly keep people from getting into legal trouble. What happened, though, was businesses said, we can't live like this. We have to be able to do business. We have to be able to take risks. I come out of the energy industry, and one time a guy said to me, if I don't go on that oil rig, I'm not at risk, or I'm at risk a lot less. But guess what? We don't get paid. So how do I manage that risk? And that really impacted me to understand that risk does not mean you can't do something. Risk just means you need to manage it. And if you put a process around it, then it becomes a business process, and business executives go, oh, it's just a process. Well, if it's a process, we will do that process. Identify, assess your risks, put together a risk management strategy, whatever that might be, train your employees on it, let them go, let them do their thing, monitor the results, and then improve it as necessary. And that's a basic business process that every business person and every corporate function has to go through. And that's why I say that it makes you run more efficiently and at the end of the day more profitably, because it's not about complying with Tom Fox, the lawyer's rules and regulations. It's about managing the risk of your corporation and me giving you a tool that you can take more risks. You don't have brakes on a car to go slow. You have brakes on a car to go fast. And if you put an appropriate risk management strategy in place, your business can go fast.
Love that.
Tom, so there's some connection you have between compliance and risk that I don't have. I can just hear it. It sounds like a leap, like something you talk about all the time. So it's obvious that connection between those two words. But it's not obvious to me, the connection between compliance and risk.
Sure. So you have a compliance function, you have a compliance department, you have a compliance program to comply with something. If that's a law, if it's a rule, if it's a regulation, if it's a business standard, whatever it may be. But if you violate whatever that is, you're going to get into reputational trouble. You're going to get into business trouble. You may get into legal trouble. And so that's why I'm trying to reframe the conversation about compliance. It's just another risk. That example I used about the guy going offshore to an oil rig, that's not a legal risk. That's a safety risk. But that's a compliance risk. You have to do business in the oil patch safely, or somebody's going to get hurt. Then you're going to get sued, and you're going to have to pay out perhaps millions of dollars. So compliance does not necessarily mean a legal risk. It can be a safety risk. It can be a climate risk. It can be a governance risk. It can be a data privacy risk. It can be a money laundering risk. It can be a wide variety of risks. But I really want to try to reframe that conversation.
Because where I kept going was like, well, okay, well, we're going to risk breaking this law. What are the odds we get caught? That's where my mind goes to it. And that's not what you mean. You really are meaning, if I dealt with compliance the way I dealt with other risks, the way I dealt with risk at all, like, okay, it's just, there's a process that may or may not have compliance laws. It's second, not to the point. If I'm going out on an oil rig, there are certain things, practices that I will do or not do to stay safe on that rig. I will manage the risk of my being on there, and it's a risk. I have over here these compliance rules about hiring people. Do I have the same kind of process to keep me on the other side, on this side of that? And if I do, then my business is running efficiently because I won't have to deal with the legal costs. I won't have to deal with anything the way I won't have to deal with the injury if I manage the risk on the oil field. That's what you're talking. That's the connection. Yes.
You're spot on.
Okay, fine. I got it. All right, good. Well, you explained that to me. That's great. Because I kept going, well, what's the risk of what's the risk of getting caught in compliance? And that's not what you're talking about. That's good.
Reminds me a little bit, Aaron, of like the distinction between, you know, how people hear integrity as
Yeah.
a moral thing versus integrity as a workability thing. Like
Yeah.
the frame of the bike is in an integrity when it hasn't been crashed. And the minute you crash it, the integrity of the frame is no longer the same. Similarly, like, you know, compliance being, I love that thought, Tom, about process. I feel like you almost gave the process so masterfully and subtly that people may have missed it. Like, is that the process, the identify, assess, strategy?
Sure. So it's assess your risk, not my risk, not your competitor's risk, but your risk. Put together a risk management strategy or a plan, train your employees on it so they understand what the plan is, monitor the success after you've trained them, and then improve as appropriate. So it's a pretty straightforward linear process that almost every business person has to go through at some point.
When you said it, I heard it as, you know, that process, you know, you could really apply that to mindfulness, that you could have you could be compliant with your own intention for being mindful. And how would you do that? You would identify how do we want to do mindfulness in this organization, assess the risk of not being mindful, put a strategy or plan in place for mindfulness. I was just using it as I'm taking your idea of compliance here and moving it into how you would comply with being mindful in your life. If it's too woo-woo, Aaron, I think people kind of go, I don't know, I don't get it. I'm not made for meditation because I can't focus long enough. And you're like, no, we'll just put a process in place so that you can comply with the steps.
It's good. Now I just want to look up Tom, do you know what's the, you know, Merriam-Webster, the definition for compliance or to comply?
No, I don't.
Okay, great.
You want to read it?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up.
Okay. While you're doing that, let me give you a great example of a compliance violation that led not to a legal violation, but a literally $1 billion stock value drop. And it's the following. 3 years ago, you may or may not remember, but on the Super Bowl, there was a commercial called Viv and Bon. Viv and Bon were two mermaids who were selling a new seltzer product. And they're in the water and they're showing the seltzer and they're in their mermaid get up with a bikini top on, as appropriate for what you would think of mermaids underwater. And about a week later, someone identifies that commercial with a blog post. That commercial came out in Super Bowl, so it's February, with a blog post that was written in December. And here's what happened. There was a casting call for actresses to come play the mermaids. They came up, they were told to bring a bikini because they would be in a water shot. And they had a meeting with the commercial production team. And they went through what the women would have to do for the audition. And at the end, they said, if there's anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like you're being harassed in any way, say something immediately. And so one woman was asked to put her bikini on, which she did. And then she was said, well, we want you to dance provocatively. And she said, no, that's not what mermaids do. And I don't see what that has to do with me auditioning for this role. And they said, well, dance provocatively or you're not going to get the role. And so she left because she didn't feel comfortable doing that in front of the audition team. She went back and she wrote a blog post based on that experience, why being asked to dance provocatively made her feel uncomfortable. It was a professional blog post. It did not name names. It didn't call anybody a name. But that went out sort of in that industry. Well, it turned out that she had interviewed for the mermaid roles from that commercial. And that commercial was for a seltzer product by AB InBev, the manufacturer, the owner of Budweiser.
Mhm.
Now, Budweiser AB InBev had a fabulous compliance program. There's a whole different set of issues. But AB InBev had zero insight into that commercial being made. And they had zero insight beyond the company they'd hired to do that commercial. And when that reporter put together that blog post together with that ad after the Super Bowl and wrote about it, it made it look like AB InBev had condoned that behavior. And their stock, which was, I think it was $83, had dropped about $2. Well, they were a $250 billion company. And the net loss was several $1 billion. Now the stock came back, but for those 2 days, it was a loss. And it was something that was not a legal violation, or at least no legal complaint was filed, but it was a reputational issue that drove the market. And so you can have a compliance violation that's not a legal violation and it still hurt your company.
And that was a compliance violation from the perspective of that ABM would never have, had the commercial been run consistent with ABM's already existing standards and practices, that woman would never have been asked to dance that way. Is that
correct? And that woman, when she raised her hand and said, "I feel uncomfortable," she
would
would
have been
have
honored?
been listened to and it would have been dealt with right there. And she would not have been told. They would have come up with a way, whatever they needed to do, but they shouldn't have even done that. And that wasn't AB InBev. That was a casting company who hired a production director,
Right,
who
all the
hired
way
somebody
down.
to hire. And so it was,
Right.
sort of 4 or 5 levels down. And it
Mhm.
was really to that person who said that to that woman, but it was under the InBev sign. So they got in trouble for
Yeah,
it.
no, I for sure. And so the two definitions. So compliance is, this is not that interesting of a definition to me. I always like it when you get a definition. It's like, oh, look at that. That's really cool. So compliance is the state of being in accordance with established guidelines, specifications, or processes. So that's perfect. That's no news there, right? But comply, I like comply. It's from the late 16th century Italian complere, which means to fill up, fulfill, to complete, to fulfill, to accomplish. The original sense was fulfill, accomplish, fulfill the requirements of courtesy. Therefore, so comply. It wasn't, so it's not what it means. Right now there's a definition of it where it's, within a standard. It originally meant just to fulfill, which I love. I just love that idea that it was a person or group act in accordance with a wish or a command. It strikes me as much more self-general, like to comply is to fulfill a wish, to fulfill, right, to fulfill or fulfill a command. But it's that world in which, okay, we get to say, okay, in that case, ABM, right, got to say, okay, here's the world in which what we're creating as a company, and our compliance standards are based on what we want to see in the world, and then to invent processes to have that be seamless, like where I don't guarantee anything, but is there a vetting process for the creative agencies at this point? Was that a hole that they saw was missing? And but I think so much has to, so there's that. And then I'm just noticing, that 99.9999% of me and of people that see it as top down, being told, and oh God, the paperwork and the legal paperwork, and what do the lawyers want from me now? And can't we get around this? And that's the same logic and shit that, makes me want to, that has me, not work out, eat ice cream, and feel like I should. Why can't I just lose weight? Like, it's the same logic There's a way in which things work, and there's a way in which if you honor it and honor the design of something, it works more efficiently. And Tom, what I hear you're doing with people is having them create the design for themselves so that they can operate inside of it.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's very cool. Chris, what do you got?
I was just hanging out in the conversation. Tom, what do you got?
Well, you had asked a question about KPIs,
Yeah.
and you had said, well, how am I going to be judged? What's my compensation going to be based on? Tell me what I need to do and let me see if I can fulfill it. And being a mindful CEO. So can we talk about that?
Yeah.
So what's the role of a CEO in compliance and ethics? Everything. It literally starts at the top. Being a great leader, of course, starts at the top, but compliance starts at the top. And even the regulators, even the Department of Justice recognizes that. And it's the most ubiquitous phrase in compliance, tone at the top. And a lot of CEOs say, well, of course we do business ethically and compliance. We're an ethical company. What else would we be? Well, how can we measure that? How can I give you as a CEO specific KPIs that can be measured for your own compensation, for your own evaluation? And if the regulator ever comes knocking and they say, it's a great company, tell us your KPIs around your CEO and compliance. There's a series of things that a CEO can do. A CEO can lead every meeting with a compliance moment. A CEO can lead a town hall on compliance. A CEO can lead a listening tour where he listens to employees' concerns about doing business ethically and in compliance. All of those can be recorded and all of those can be measured. And so for a CEO to say, well, how can I do this? That's too squishy. I can't be evaluated on it. Yes, you can. That's what HR does all the time. And but it all starts at the top. And if a CEO leads a town hall, he leads his direct reports meetings, or he leads a conversation with the employees on, we want to do business ethically and in compliance, that message is going to resonate with the employee base because they want to do what the CEO wants them to do. That's the way we're all wired. If the boss wants it, I'm going to try and give it to him.
Yeah. I just like the part about being able to measure stuff. And I don't think that gets it. It's almost like mindfulness, Aaron, in my experience, has been like almost an escape from measuring stuff. Like, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to be over here meditating and watching my thoughts and going with the flow and, divining what's next for me. And yet there's this piece about like, if we really have an impact that we want to make, because I think most of our listeners are people who are saying like, the reason mindful CEO matters to me is because I want to leave the world better than I found it. I want to make an impact. And I don't know, Tom, just hearing like the value of having a process and a way to measure it only makes sense to me. And it's helping me just reorient myself to the value of a process and measuring it. It's not my natural style, but I hear the value in it for me.
And that's why I continually try to emphasize that if we can put those values, if we can put that mindfulness, if we can put that desire. So for me, that's a desire to help fight the world scourge of bribery and corruption. Well, if I put that into a process by which we're doing business in our company, I get to fight that scourge. And any CEO who has any mindfulness or whatever they might be mindful about, we can build that in as well. So we can take all of those desires, all of those things, we can make them measurable and we can make them a part of the business process, and we can unleash the corporate world on it. And who knows what innovation would come up with next.
Wow. Yeah, I love that.
It's, Chris, both of you are talking about the processes, and Tom, you said, you start your meeting talking about a compliance issue, which again, I think for everyone listening, anyone listening, like I'm listening, has to keep dealing with, okay, the default sort of dumbass, let's open
Yeah.
the HR manual to page 22,
Yeah.
right? Or all the, clearings that I've had to sit through over the years in corporate America, like, okay, we could do a quarterly sexual harassment clearing or whatever. And all those are, the normal bucket for where compliance falls. But then there's this space, Tom, of what you're, the meta version of what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, well, every day what we do in terms of managing our ethics around here, like what else would we do? Like I often wondered, how criminals think they are, like when you get down to the humanity level of it, it's all right, I'm just going to have one of my kids' candies over Halloween. Is that an ethics violation or is it justified? But it's just, there's where, those lines get blurry fast. And I do think that, when you get to the major Enrons and the obvious examples of the massive corruption, how corrupt did they think they were every step of the way? And I think I'd be surprised if they Bernie Madoff really considered himself corrupt. But those kinds of that's over there. But just that practice of standing up in a meeting and saying, okay, this is who we are. Creating who we are is the future that we're out to fulfill. Tom's out to fulfill the end of bribery and corruption in business. And you've said that 3 or 4 times. And I can even repeat it. What you've created for yourself, that's a practice, that's a process, a practice of making sure you're compliant with who you say you are, is keep creating that. And I think there's a lot of things that fall into the processes of compliance that we don't think, that aren't the same as open page 32 of the HR manual. And let's now read about the dating people we supervise policy again. Although the dating people you supervise policy is clearly an important compliant issue, because it's going to create a huge mess if you're not compliant with it. But it's no more compliance than it is for you to stand up and say, okay, I am here to end bribery and corruption in business. That's also a compliance practice. And I love expanding the context of compliance to all of that, to being a created future for ourselves, rather than can't date people you supervise.
Let me take it in another direction, which is, and you mentioned Enron. Well, Enron and WorldCom gave us Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley was the first U.S. law that mandated corporations to have a hotline or a whistleblower reporting system. And this was supposed to be so that if people saw something, they could report. That was expanded with Dodd-Frank because the Securities and Exchange Commission began issuing whistleblower financial incentives for cases that got turned over to the SEC where they successfully prosecuted and got money. We're now to the point we've evolved far past that, because hotlines and whistleblowers became speak up. You see something, say something. Well, then people realized it's not having a place to speak up. It's, do managers listen? Do leaders listen? And so the conversation now is speak up, listen up. It's probably going to evolve to listen up. Now, that was originally designed to prevent illegal actions, specifically coming out of Enron, where a whistleblower said, something's wrong, please investigate Ken Lay. And he was the president or CEO of Enron. And now it is people speaking up saying, I think we can do this better. I see a new process that we can make the company more efficient. And about 4 years ago was the first academic study on speak up cultures. And the professor, a guy named Kyle Welch out of GW, was stunned to find that companies with a culture of speak up, meaning speak up and listening, had a material difference in their legal and regulatory costs. And that's 5% in standard accounting rules. Well, if you're Exxon and your legal bill goes down 5%, that's a big deal. And then he found those companies were actually more profitable because once employees figured out it was safe to raise their hand and speak up and introduce new ideas, the companies would listen to them. They became more efficient. So they tapped into a resource, which was their own employee base, to make the companies more profitable. And that's a direct result out of compliance of something that happened in the end of the 90s and the law that was passed in 2001. And so that's another area that people don't really think of as compliance, but it's a business process. But the key is that mindful CEO who says, we're going to listen. We're going to create a safe space. And more importantly, we're going to listen.
Dynamite. I just got to see, I can't remember his name, Will Giarda, I think his name is. He wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, which fabulous keynote speaker, just fabulous. Got a world out of it. Chris, I'll share with you about it. But one of the things he talked about in his restaurant was, and this is just a general principle, business principle, but they, the people with the most say about the company have the least information about how to make things happen. The people who have the most say about how to, do anything within the company have the least operational information, and the people with the most operational information have the least say about how to have things go differently. And that's the standard arrangement. Your dishwashers in the restaurant and the servers have the least voice. It's the CEO, it's the owner, and they have the least insight. They're not there in the day-to-dayness of it. And finding a way to balance that, to have people have the most, and there's just countless studies about that. When Amazon or what Zappos, the way Zappos handles customer returns is that they, every phone rep has permission to do anything needed to make the customer happy. And, there's a budget for it's like within $150 or something. They can do anything to get that person happy. Because they're there on the front lines about that. And any way to even that out. And that's what, Tom, you're talking about is listen up lines. And isn't there stuff in that in Good to Great? Isn't there? I just feel like this is not a new conversation, that this is.
It's not new, but it's certainly evolving and continuing to evolve.
And I love how that your example, Tom, comes out of Enron, how it started as a compliant, that's to make CEOs listen. You have to threaten them with lawsuits to get them to listen to employees. Oh, and by the way, it's also more profitable.
I mean, I wanted to piggyback on that a little because I feel like the marketer in me just wants to use a different word. Can we just use a different word besides compliance? Because I feel like there's a word that better represents what we're talking about. And yet the rebel in me loves the subversive. Let's get into the conversation of compliance so we can redirect people's attention about what is really available and possible through compliance. Because we all start with compliance so that we can protect our ass, but and do things so we don't get in legal trouble. But if we really could start to listen, like you're both saying, like now we actually can fulfill, Aaron, to the definition of comply, we can fulfill our intentions for profit.
Let me go back to what you just started with, which was your marketing hat.
Yeah.
And for compliance professionals, one of the things I try to drive into their hearts is, who are your customers? They're employees. Why not bring marketing strategies to your compliance messaging?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm talking to lawyers and they're like, we didn't learn that in law school. What's that? And so doing exactly what you said, which is bringing that marketing hat, that's driving a message of compliance in a way that engages employees. So if you quit saying, yeah, I'm the chief compliance officer here, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that,
Right.
and don't do that. Oh, and that guy over there who doesn't like authority, let's just, let's send him to special projects where he can't hurt anything. No,
Right.
no, we're not Nancy. No.
Yeah.
So it's
Dr. No
marketing.
in the land of no.
Yeah, it's marketing. It's just marketing. And
Right.
why not go down the hall and talk to your comms people?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Good. Love that.
Yeah. I mean, that's where click it or ticket comes from, right? I mean, that's a compliance marketing message, right? Click it or ticket. That's compliance made into marketing. All right, good. All right. Well, Tom, I feel like that's a great place to pause here. And I really appreciate your bringing this to us, because this is just such a it's nice to get grounded back in the CEO side of the podcast, of the business owner side of it, because we really do get stretched out into the woo-woo side regularly. So I find it useful to dust off those cobwebs and get back into real more meaningful CEO conversations as well. So thank you for that, Tom. If people want to get a hold of you, they want to get some information from you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn at Thomas R. Fox. My podcast network is, as I said, the compliancepodcastnetwork.net. You can reach me through there. You can leave a voicemail on a little cool tool called SpeakPipe. And you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. And I'd love to continue this conversation if anyone wants to do so.
Love it. So good.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Aaron.
Right.
Thanks, Tom.
Great. Well, if you're listening to the podcast, hang on, Chris, we got to do the promo. You always want to run off before we do the promo. If you're listening, if you're one of the 5 people listening, tell another 5 people. You want review us on any of the podcast things that you're listening to this on. Share this with your friends. Get in touch with us if you need anything. We really appreciate your being here, and we'll see you next time. Now sign off, Chris. Now you can.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Aaron. Until next time. Bye.